Hi, Judith, and welcome to this discussion we're going to have about free school meals. Before we start, it might be useful if you just introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, Tim. I'm Judith Gregory. I work for Cardiff Council in the school meals service. I'm also a trained home economist, and I've worked for Cardiff School Meals for the last 15 years. Also part of the team that developed the school holiday enrichment programme for Wales. So that was developed in Cardiff 5 years ago, and then was then adopted by Welsh Government, and who provided funding for the programme, which was then rolled out to all local authorities across Wales. So I do sit on the national steering group for the school holiday enrichment programme. And in addition to that, I'm here today in my capacity as LACA Wales Regional Chair. So LACA is a national organisation that provides support for all education caterers across the UK, and the Wales region is just one region out of a number of regions across the UK for LACA organisation.
Great, thanks, Judith, and thanks again for joining us. I think, as you probably know, we did some work in the summer looking at the provision of free school meals during the first lockdown, and then running into the autumn. And just quickly, in terms of my background, I'm one of the audit managers with Audit Wales, and I was involved in the work on that piece of work that we did last year on free school meals. So that's why I'm here today talking with you. And as I say, we're really grateful that you can join us, and I think we're particularly interested in learning a bit more about free school meals over the last year and what's changed and what some of your experiences are. And we're really grateful that you're here in your capacity as chair of LACA, so you can give that oversight. So I suppose my first question, really, from your perspective, how in general do you think the provision of free school meals has evolved over the past year?
Right, well, to go back to sort of March last year, obviously it was a very sort of quick decision and process in terms of the schools closing. We had to put arrangements in place to support the free school meal children with that very short notice. So it has, for all that have been involved in the provision of free school meals, a very steep learning curve. Initially, we had, as I say, we had to put some arrangements in place. So in the main, that was packed lunches were provided across Wales. But it quickly, we quickly realised that wasn't sustainable. In Cardiff, for example, we did it for 2 weeks, and at the time we were catering for just over 11,000 free school meal pupils. So it was a massive organisation, an operation that was needed to do that. But we also, across Wales, local authorities found that, there was that increasing reluctance for families to actually come out of their homes to go to visit a school to pick up a packed lunch. And also there was that issue as well in terms of protecting the identity of the children that are entitled to free school meals, which is really important. The other issue that difficulty we had as well was, in terms of when you're distributing food from a school, you've got to consider those pupils who would normally attend a Welsh medium or special school who are transported in. So it's not easy for them to get to their school to pick up those lunches. However, for doing that for the first couple of weeks, it did give us all a little bit of time to look at other options and put plans in place. And obviously alongside that, we were getting funding support from Welsh Government because within 2 weeks of the initial lockdown, the Easter holidays started, and Welsh Government put funding in place to support those free school meal children through the Easter holidays. So it did, as I say, it gave us a little bit of time to get some plans in place, and then local authorities, we were all sort of worked together really in terms of sharing information in terms of what we were able to do. So in the main, it was, we moved to direct payments. Some authorities provided, vouchers. And then we've had a few authorities who've been providing food parcels, which have gained quite a lot of interest, and support from families as well. And then, of course, in addition to all of that, the schools were kept open in terms of the hub schools that were providing support for the children of key workers, and also the vulnerable children as well. So we had to maintain a catering operation for those children, which was a slight sort of change in terms of it was a more extended school day. So obviously because of those, the key workers working shifts, etc. So we were then providing breakfast, lunch and an afternoon tea for those children. But, when I say that we, all work together across Wales, what was becoming evident is that in the same way as within a local authority, we can see that there are schools that are different, one size doesn't fit all. That became clear across the local authorities as well. So that was a real sort of insight into the way that we all operate as caterers. We also had support from, as I said earlier, from Welsh Government in terms of the funding that was being provided, and also from the Welsh Local Government Association. So, in the early days, there was a lot of collaboration between LACA, WLGA and Welsh Government. And, LACA was able to provide that information in terms of operational information that the Welsh Government, needed in order to create the guidelines and the funding that they were obviously putting in place. And of course, it was an ever-changing situation. So we had there was a lot of meetings involved in the early stages. Into sometimes there was up to 3 meetings a day because the situation was changing so quickly. As the lockdown progressed, then WLGA facilitated meetings with each local authority, which was really useful again for for sharing of information. And LACA also arranged regional meetings because, of course, LACA represents education caterers, but also the suppliers to education catering. So whilst we as local authorities all knew what was happening within Wales, it was very important to keep suppliers abreast of the developments and the plans. So that was particularly useful for them because, of course, a lot of the suppliers supply the UK, not just Wales. And as we all know, school meals in Wales is very different to school meals in England. So as the school meals service restarted then in September, there were a lot of things that needed to be considered in terms of capacity of dining areas, and the school kitchens in order to maintain social distancing. We had to look at completely new ways of delivering food to the children. Very much an emphasis on using disposables instead of crockery and cutlery. Providing meals to other areas of the schools, which had challenges in terms of manual handling, and also supporting head teachers as well, because they obviously have had an awful lot of challenges that they've had to overcome just in part of their normal day-to-day work, and then to start thinking about how they're actually going to manage a catering service as well within their school. So that we've had to provide an awful lot of support to them to being able to reinstate the school meals service in each of those schools. And as I said earlier, each school is slightly different, so one size will not fit all in terms of a school meal service.
Well, thanks, Judith. That's fascinating. I think one of the things that struck us when we were undertaking our work in the summer was the speed with which things had changed. And I think we commented in the report, as you've talked about then, that it wasn't just one change; it carried on, and things changed again and again. I think that sounds like, as I say, a fascinating story in itself around how things changed quickly and then changed again, and then you had to adapt to the new normal, for want of a better word, and so on. It's really interesting. I suppose from our perspective as well, we're really interested to hear what you've learned from all of that. What you think the learning points are, because there must have been an awful lot of change, an awful lot of different things to deal with. You've talked about some of them already. Yeah. I guess it'd be really interesting what you've learned over the course of the pandemic in relation to the work you've done around free school meals.
Yes, because that's what we found, is that, once we'd overcome one particular challenge, another challenge was coming up. When the schools returned in September, we, as I say, we had the challenges of, actually providing a school meal service, but then we started getting both staff and pupils having to self-isolate as a result of being in contact with the positive cases. And of course, for the free school meal pupils, that meant that although they were back in school, we had to then continue to support them whilst they were being self-isolated. So, we had to put in procedures and processes to enable that to happen, because, one of the things that the Welsh Government is very, really stresses is the fact that free school meal pupils can't be seen to be double benefiting, so that they can't have a payment for free school meals and also have a meal in school. So that there was, there's a lot of processes that we've had to, put into place to enable that, to make sure that doesn't happen. And the other thing is as well is that when you're providing a meal service, you don't know how many children are going to turn up each day. There's still that reluctance out there from parents in terms of them not wanting to send their children to school. So there's the difficulties in terms of, as I say, not knowing how many you're actually catering for each day, and also the impact on the suppliers as well as a result of that, because especially at the start of this year, in terms of the beginning of the spring term, we found that the late notice that we were getting of schools closing was really impacting on our food, because we'd already ordered food in, so there was a lot of food wastage, because I think there's the lack of understanding within the supply chain, so that whilst we can order food and have it delivered into a school the following day, obviously there's a lot of work that's gone on in the background prior to that date, in terms of our food distributors ordering that food in from manufacturers. So that's been something that we've really learnt in terms of there's an awful lot of planning that needs to go into to actually get to this point. But at the end of the day, we've all managed to get there. It's, as I said, it's been a steep learning curve, but we've been innovative, we've been flexible, and I think that is really the key. In terms of the ever-changing situation, we don't know what is going to be the next thing that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, is there anything you'd think, having learned what you've learned over the last year, you would do differently if you had to do it again, or any learning points? If that maybe not specific to free school meals, but things you've learned and thought that was something where we next time we would probably do that differently, or just wonder if there's anything around that.
I think, looking back, when we did the packed lunches, that, we were doing it based on what we would normally do in normal times, that if there was ever an occasion where, obviously, the gas went down in a kitchen, for example, and we couldn't provide meals that day, we would provide children in school with a packed lunch. So I think it was we were in that mindset that that's the solution. But obviously, as things have developed, we quickly realised that wasn't the solution, because of all the other factors that were involved in it. So I think that would be the one thing that we sort of look back on. And as I say, it was a very onerous task to deliver that number of meals, both physically and mentally, trying to work out how to get them across cities, etc. So yeah, I think that would be the main sort of learning point. But as I said, we do need to be flexible and adapt to the changing situation.
I think we quite quickly, when we looked at this work last year, realised there must have been a huge logistical challenge involved in this, and there must have been an awful lot of things to think about, as I said earlier. But that logistical challenge on its own must have been really significant. So how or do you think the pandemic will change the way free school meals are delivered in the future? Do you think there will be lasting changes? Will it be back to the previous way of delivering it, or anything you'd like to add around that?
It's really difficult to say, because we don't know how the pandemic's going to pan out, do we? In terms of, like I said, you think that we get over one thing, overcome one challenge, and then something else is presented. So I think at the moment, we've just got to continue with being in that sort of mindset. But I think, obviously the health and well-being of the children has got to be at the forefront of everybody's minds. But like you said, school caterers are very resourceful and resilient. They've got a reputation for finding solutions, and I think that they should be commended in terms of all the innovation and the support and loyalty really that they've shown in meeting the challenges that we've had. At the end of the day, it's the children of Wales that have benefited from it.
I think again, going back to the work we did in the summer, we didn't do a full audit of this, but we did certainly identify some positive indicators of how well councils, schools, etc. responded to the challenge. So I think that's I think that's really worth mentioning as well. Absolutely. I suppose, taking on your point, you talked about agility and being able to adapt. And I mean, would you have any advice for anybody else who had to change a service quickly, or change a service if either because they're forced to, in the way that councils were on free school meals, or they decide to change quickly? What any advice you would give to them?
I think it's looking at what you're doing, but also seeking help from others as well. I mean, that's one thing that when we started doing the free school meal payments, because we were within Cardiff, we were sort of innovative and developed a payment system which effectively reversed what the normal cashless payment system was all about. So instead of parents paying into the cashless system, we as a local authority paid into the cashless system, and then parents were able to withdraw for their free school meals. But that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had the support from other areas of the council as well. So quite often you don't realise, working within a local authority, exactly what everybody else does, because you're very much focused on your own area, doing the sort of the normal day-to-day work. But we realise there's other service areas that could help us. So real sort of partnership work in collaboration across service areas. I think that's a really important thing to do, and you don't realise how much knowledge is within the councils to be able to support that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's interesting. So it's I think we did again hear examples of, and I think we referred to this in the report, about arrangements being one thing, but goodwill or commitment, whatever phrase you want to use, but people going the extra mile to really make sure that the council or the public sector, if you like, responded to this challenge. I think that was something that came through. Is that in the same kind of space?
Yeah, and another example of that would be during the normal summers, we would be running the school holiday enrichment programme. And last summer, Welsh Government were unable to fund it because they'd repurposed that funding for free school meals. However, they did manage to provide some funding for what they called a school activities programme, which is something that we embraced in Cardiff. But because we felt that we should be, there was a recognised need that families should be supported in terms of the vulnerable children, we ran it slightly differently to how we would normally run a school holiday enrichment programme. And that drew in, other members of staff within the education department who provided an awful lot of support for us.
So I mean, it's interesting. So some positives maybe going forward as well from all of that in terms of relationships and so on. I suppose before we finish, is there anything else any other message you would like to talk about, or anything else you'd like to say about your experience of the last year, and anything you'd like to share in terms of learning points?
I think, whilst we've all been really busy, obviously doing all of this work, and I speak for all education caterers across Wales in this respect. I think we've all thrived on it because at the end of the day, we all wanted to make sure that the children got the support they needed. And that has kept us going, that we've done it for the children.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So, and I think, again, that's something we picked up quite strongly in our work, that the commitment and the various anecdotal evidence that we heard of people doing that kind of thing to really make sure that the children got the meals and support they needed. So, well, thanks very much, Judith. That's been really interesting. I'm really grateful again for you giving your time and being able to give us a real insight of how things have gone and some of your practical learning points and tips were, again, really useful and really interesting. So thanks again. I think that's been really helpful. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.